Good day, it's Tony Fortunato from the technology firm. Today we are going to start a brand new series of articles and videos about baselining, and I get tons and tons of questions via emails and whatever, people asking how do you do it, what does this mean, all that kind of jazz. So I'm going to start with the basics and we're going to just make our way through it. So keep your eyes open for the next article, and hopefully this is going to help you out as you go along. If you have any ideas, suggestions, feedback, by all means fire it over and I'll try to include it in my next write-up. All right, so let's get into it. So baselining, no problem. Yeah, we'll see. So a network is not a pretty fluffy cloud. And for the people who've seen this before, I've done this. I use this one slide a ton of times because it's very helpful. And the network is not a pretty fluffy cloud. Like people, they draw this thing and they say it's the network. And no, the network is comprised of patch cable, faceplates, patch panels, switches, all that jazz, right? So it's a ton of stuff. The point is every single one of these components can be measured, baselined, obviously troubleshot, all that kind of good stuff. And a good example is something really simple, patch cable, right? So you plug in the wall, doesn't work, it doesn't work. So what do? You get another cable. Hey, it works. Therefore, that patch cable was quote unquote bad. Doesn't matter if the pins were missing or who knows, whatever. The point is you have a way of testing, measuring it, and then moving on. It's the same thing for a client, for a switch, for a phone. Anything can be documented, baselined, and so on. So the point is, how and where do I start baselining or troubleshooting? Now, this is kind of a key point. Why? Baselining and troubleshooting, in my case, for me personally, it's the same thing. So it doesn't matter if I'm baselining or troubleshooting. I have the same methodology, I look for the same information, and I document it the same way. And that's really helpful because a baseline should be used for reference when you troubleshoot. There shouldn't really be a stretch between the two, right? So just keep that in mind as we go through this. So the importance of profiling, people call it a profile, or baselining. So in the simplest form, a baseline can be used to expedite the troubleshooting process by providing a snapshot of certain statistics. This is really important. So it's a snapshot. It's a point in time. So I measured that switch port and there was 30 megabits per second and there was 10 CRCs. So at that point in time, that's what was there. Not next week, not last week, that kind of thing. It's that point in time. So in a more detailed form, a baseline can be used to explain, that's what we use it for usually, or predict a change to a network component, host, or application. And that second part is where things get a little trickier because I can say, hey, if I have an application and one user generates 10 megabits per second, like they're streaming a video, then therefore 3 users would be 3 times 10 meg. And then the arguments start, oh, what if you're multicasting? What if, whatever. The point is, whatever numbers you get, you can start to predict what you think will happen, and therefore you can compare it to what happens, right? And that's the only thing I really mean from that statement. If you wait to baseline during a problem, it is very difficult to figure out if the results are good or bad because you got a problem, right? So if you wait till you have an issue to start recording numbers, everything's going to seem like a red herring. Everything's going to seem like a problem. Many applications experience normal errors daily with no adverse effect. And I just right now, I just had a conversation with somebody and we were looking at some stuff and there was a lot of errors. And I asked him, has this always been going on? I don't know. But he thinks it has something to do with the problem. And I said, but if you don't know how long that error's been there, it could just be something that's always there as background noise and is not really contributing to the issue. So this is the dilemma that we're in, right? What a baseline is, and this is from a site called Wiktionary. I can never say that right. Wiktionary. There you go. A datum. Math people know datum, right? So a datum used as the basis for calculation for comparison. There you go. And I think the confusion arises when people throw around the word datum because it's kind of a generic word. The datum should be something specific or concise. So I refer to it more as a snapshot. People tend to relate to that word a little bit better. Baseline techniques or methodologies should be interchangeable between troubleshooting and profiling. And that's what I just said in the previous slide. They should be the same technique, same documentation, same values, that kind of stuff. Several baselines can be combined to provide a more comprehensive report. So what I mean by that is you're going to see in a few more slides. I strongly suggest, spoiler alert, your baselines are small discrete things like a boot up, a login, a query, one thing just and try to capture that, and therefore you can analyze it better and that kind of stuff. But then you can put it all together if you need to, right? If you want to see the whole process, it's harder to break it apart. That's the point. What a baseline isn't. This is from me, Tony. So it's a Tonyism, as some people call them. So a baseline is not 2-day, 300 page, or a 3-binder report. I see those and I just cringe and I kind of phase out. Something generic, the network. People ask me this all the time. Tony, can you baseline my network? And I said that you can't do that. Like, you want to baseline a switch, an application, a server, an access point. The network is comprised of all that junk I showed you from that second slide. So it's kind of hard to tell you what the network looks like. A static value that never changes. And that is totally, like, really spot on. You got to remember that point. Whatever you baseline today, so if you did a speed test and you got 50 megabits per second, do it again 3 seconds later. It's not 50. It'll be 49, it'll be 52, it'll be 10. But you very rarely get the exact same value every single time. It doesn't work that way. Something that only specialized staff can conduct with specialized tools. And that used to be the case in, I'm going to say, the mid-90s. You had to buy, $50,000 analyzers. Nowadays, you've got so many free, open source, and low-price tools. Anybody can do this with the proper methodology. And something you only do when a problem arises. That's what you don't do, right? So you don't try to do a baseline when a problem arises. You can capture stuff and try to extrapolate, but it's pretty tough, right? For those of you who've tried that. So the setup's real simple. If you want to do a boot up or a login, because that's the most, I'm going to say, basic baseline I do, where you get the most mileage, your biggest bang for your buck. You got a client, you got a switch, and you put a tap in there, right? And you have an analyzer. For the people who can't afford a tap, you can even use something like a hub, right? Half duplex. Make sure everything's set for half duplex. You're more important with the quality of the conversation. You're not really concerned about the speed of the data. So that's kind of why you can get away with a hub. But ideally a tap. And if you don't have a tap and you have a managed switch, you can span or mirror a port, and you can do the same thing. The reason why you need to do that is because you want to be the third person, and you're going to be powering on the client for the boot up baseline, and obviously you can't capture when you're powering on your machine. So you need another laptop or another analyzer or device that'll do that. Here's some simple baseline examples. 30 millisecond average ping response time between two hosts, something everybody does every day. What's the response time for ping? 98 megabits per second iPerf between these hosts on a Sunday. And I would probably go a little further and say Sunday at 3 p.m., just, so you know what time it is. 44 megabit per second FTP throughput between these two hosts on Sunday, December 1st at 1 p.m. There you go. That's a little bit better. The application Acme received 18 megabits per second of traffic and used 36 SQL commands during an account query. That's a very specific baseline, right? Or a snapshot. This network will not have OSPF, RIP, CDP, or IPv6 present. That's a good one to know. And so on and so on and so on. So these are all little simple baselines. Every single one of these sentences do not take long to get that answer. They don't. So even an FTP, you just do your copy. Hey, I got a number. Done, right? iPerf, run it. Got your number. Move on. So the boot up or the login baseline. So this is kind of important. Based on how your devices are configured, they will send out certain types of packets and communicate to various devices when they boot up. So based on your login profile, even more traffic will be generated. I should say can be, but I'll go on a limb, will be generated to get access to certain servers, printers, group policies, etc., etc., etc. This traffic is often overlooked since you have successfully logged in. What that means is you boot up, you log in, there's nothing glaringly wrong on your screen, everything seems to work all right. So guess what? There's nothing wrong. And I'm telling you right now, there's a lot of things you can tweak. Once you get into this stuff, you'll see that there's a lot of things you can do. Keep in mind, you are in the office and you have a lot of bandwidth. Unfortunately, the same laptop and login might take much longer when you work from home and you VPN into the office. And I'm sure a lot of people experience that. Why is it slow from home, but it's fast at my desk? The bandwidth can be a big contributing factor to that. I've seen computers download 40 megabytes of data on boot up and another 120 megabytes on login. I've seen that more than once, okay? So just be prepared for something goofy if you see it. I've also seen computers not work when they lose their network connection or when they perform a Wi-Fi handoff. Now this is equally important. I was just at a client just a few days ago. Guess what? He said, hey, unplug from your network, plug into this little switch. We'll have a little isolated network. And out of the 5 people in the room, 3 of them could not use their laptop when they moved that connection over. They had to do a proper shutdown. They had to reboot. They had to log in a different way as a local account, and then they could do stuff. But that's things you need to know, and that shows you how dependent you are on the network and those servers. An application profile or snapshot. Now, the application behavior is the least understood aspect of performance. People don't take the time to understand how the apps really work. And applications depend, that's what I was just getting at a moment ago, on various servers for things like name resolution, data, printing, authentication, other functions. So when you launch your application, there's a whole lot of stuff that has to happen in the background. And not only does those servers have to be up, which is obvious, if the server's down, you got a problem, but the path to that server needs to be healthy, like packet loss, latency, that kind of thing, to make sure that things work at a good, acceptable performance, right? So I'm not concerned about up or down at this point. To complicate things further, the servers in turn transparently send back data and forth between the servers to complete the task at hand. So these are when you talk about 2-tiered, 3-tiered, 4-tiered servers where you talk to server A, but in the background he's talking to server B and C, and then gives you the information. So if you don't know if that's happening, that may not explain why things are slow with server A, that type of conversation. The application behavior, server dependency, load protocols, port numbers, packet size should be documented to better understand or tune it. And that's one of the first things we do, right? So when you capture packets with Wireshark, what's my top 5, what's my top 10 hosts that I speak to, how much data is it, what kind of protocols are they, blah, 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 blah. This type of information is invaluable when the application experiences performance issues, remote access is required through a firewall, and to get better gauge if this application is ready for remote access. So that's one good example of doing that. So what are the common things to note? I just mentioned a few of them. What are the total bytes of your trace file? What are the total time? Does it take 30 seconds to log in, 5 minutes to log in? And the reason why you want to know that, if you clean things up, did it go from 5 minutes to 1 minute? Did it go from 1 minute to 5 minutes? That sort of thing. What's the date and time? Brief client description. Is it Windows 8, 10, what's 7, whatever it happens to be. Top 5 IP addresses of packets sent. So who's your top talkers? If you want to think of it that way, you can do the opposite. Packets received are your top 5 receivers or listeners. 5 hosts and bytes sent. So, okay, this IP address sent 100 meg, sent 30 meg, and that sort of thing. I'm more concerned about who's sending a lot more than I am who's receiving a lot. Top 5 hosts and bytes received, and then we have our hosts with the most retransmissions. That tells you if you have a link with some issues, a host, a VLAN, something like that. If you see a lot of retransmissions, it helps things kind of pop up to the top of things to look for. Host or application with the highest latency. Woo, there you go. So thanks for watching. Again, I just wanted to do a really basic video to kind of set the stage. The next are going to all be more specific. I'm going to give you little worksheets, templates, and all that good stuff so you can go away and try to figure out how well things work, and you can learn about protocol analysis in the process. Have a good day. Bye for now.